All right, obviously the first page should be pretty self-explanatory. I'm Mr. Vote. You can call me Mr. Vote, Mr. V, any variation on that you like. Not that it matters, we're still technically at North Campus. No phone number because there's no phone in my office anyway, not that I could get there. You can always try calling department secretary if you want to leave a message that has to do with clerical work, paperwork, but email is the best way to get in touch with me. So for this semester, assume that email address is where most of the correspondence is going to take place. Under duress, we could do something like a WebEx meeting individually or phone calls if needed, but presumably for most of you, email is going to be the safest way to try to stay in touch with me and make sure you're up to date with the course. I'm going to skip the course description and objectives because you know most of that also. Essentially, by the end of this class, you're going to be reading more closely, you're going to be writing more intelligently, and you're going to be more persuasive in your logic through nuance and critical thinking. This is important. Some of you, like me, may have grown up with parents who said anytime a teacher says it's recommended but not required, you better make sure you get the thing. This is not one of those times. So that is a very lightweight suggestion. If you have a style manual already, that's basically a book of American Standard Grammar, neat, it might be helpful, but honestly for this class, these three letters, OWL, there it goes. If you just wrote down OWL, that would get you there. That's a website sponsored by Purdue University called the Online Writing Lab, and it's got everything you could possibly need from a style manual. That gets you grammar, that gets you MLA citation, that gets you how to cite a resource in a research essay, and we're going to talk about the ones that I consider most important. But if you're looking for an outside source, this is all for free, it's online, and I think it literally comes up in Google even before the bird owl comes up as one of the #1 hits. So next we have the other things you'll need. Now that you've gotten the good news that there is no textbook for the class, I'm going to provide you with all the resources you need. I recommend taking physical notes. I like my notes in one place. I like something physical that I can hold. So much of this is digital. Actually physically writing notes down may engage a different part of your brain. There's some science that makes it look like if you're physically writing notes down. For instance, right now, if you just said, physical notes might be important, your brain could potentially log that a little bit more aggressively than if you just saw it once in a YouTube video and it kind of passes away. I also like written notes because you can combine the key vocab terms. That's where the quiz material is going to come from. So that's mandatory notes. You definitely want to write those down and make flashcards and prepare for quizzes. But if you take notes and you have a notebook that's all one class, you might be able to see the continuity of the course. You see the shape of where the course is going. You might have a better picture of what I'm planning from a big picture standpoint and not just lesson to lesson. Obviously you're here, so you already have some internet access, and I wanted to make a case for why I chose to make this course asynchronous, which means you can watch this video whenever you want. You don't have to sit in front of the computer for a WebEx lecture at the time it's presented. I wanted to explain why I chose this. This was specific on my part. Last semester I tried to do a lot of live WebEx lectures. I tried to do live stream through YouTube. I tried some Skype, all of which failed pretty miserably because either my setup with my computer, my internet connection, or some third variable I don't understand that has to do with witchcraft haunted me through the entire semester. So I found it very difficult to be consistent live. And I figure if I'm having trouble, I should be able to afford a good internet connection. I've got a decent laptop that was set up for video editing, and I still had problems. I thought it would be unfair to students who are only as adept as me or don't even have as good an internet connection. So I deliberately chose to make it asynchronous so you wouldn't be punished for having to show up for those live lectures if the WebEx breaks down, your internet connection isn't the greatest of all time. Just seems like it would be a little bit more fair to you guys. So as long as you have internet access intermittently, you can get the internet most of the time or more than half the time, you're going to be fine for the course. Alright, the obsessive compulsive in me had to rearrange the screen so that we could see everything under grade determination in one scene. First important point I'd make about grade determination, If you combine the homework, the reader responses, the grab bag assignments, and the concept quiz, and I would describe all of those as pretty easy individually, like no one of those assignments should be a big challenge, that gets you 30% of your grade. So that's not nothing, and you'll notice that that is more significant than any one essay. So what you want to do is think about those assignments as providing a cushion. If you're consistent, you're handing in the homework regularly, you're remembering to do the grab bag assignments based on your grading contract. It'll depend on how many you're doing through the semester. And you just take good enough notes so that you can handle the 3 concept quizzes, all of which are going to be 10 points each. That gives you a lot of grade credit to hedge against one of the essays going badly. So keep in mind that just keeping up with the short assignments, making sure you're staying up to date, that really can give you a nice big boost to your grade if you're intimidated about the actual essays. The actual essays themselves, I deliberately stagger it so the first 2 are a little bit lighter weight. Those are only 10% of your grade, and the last 2 are 15%. That means that that last essay isn't like a giant 30% piece of your grade. I'm deliberately calling it the qualitative investigation essay to avoid the word research. It's basically a research essay, but it will be different than the one that you did in high school. Hopefully it will give you opportunities to be more interesting and creative than you were in high school. But there isn't a giant research paper at the end with an annotated bibliography that's worth 30% of your grade. So keep that in mind. If you keep up to date with these short assignments, the essays actually have less pressure. You're under less pressure to get those essays exactly right to maintain your target grade for the course overall. So that gets us the remaining 20% of your grade as being participation. Don't forget, that's still larger than any one single essay. And of course, I have to put in-class participation in quotes because we're online. Normally this would be participating in class discussions, group projects, making sure that you're not the person whose only sound that you make in the class is your head hitting the wall when you fall asleep in the back. But for this class, while we're doing this online, most of you will get that 20% credit from the class forum contributions. Let me tell you what the class forum contributions will look like. I'll pose a question like, what makes a better pet, cats or dogs? And a brave first person will start a new thread. And in answer to the question, what makes a better pet, cats or dogs, that person may say, well, even though I know that cats have been around since the ancient Egyptians, my dog Teddy has been there for me since I was 6 years old, gotten me through a lot of breakups, and is closer to me than most family members. And that's it. That's your opinion. Maybe there's a little analysis built in, but essentially it's your chance to try out expressing an opinion in writing out loud in a public forum. As the semester moves forward, hopefully your contributions to the posts will get a little more sophisticated, a little bit more nuanced, but there'll always be a combination of opinion and analysis. You also can contribute to that 20% through the campfire Q&A sessions. Those are totally optional because they are live. I can't guarantee my streaming will work. I don't want to penalize anybody who doesn't have access to it, but roughly once a week I'll try to do a live session that will be pretty casual, pretty laid back. Anybody who wants to attend can, and if you attend, that will also count towards the 20% participation grade. So you could actually pull back on the forum contributions if you're leaning more heavily on the campfire Q&A questions. Any other initiative that you can take that has to do with helping classmates or participating in the class one level above that kind of passive observer, that also could help boost that 20% as well. Alright, you already know that procrastination is bad for you. That's kind of an eat your vegetables statement. It's so obvious it shouldn't have to be said. But I've actually changed my perspective on what procrastination is and how we can deal with it. So we're actually going to talk about that more within the next week or two. So if you can believe it, we're not going to talk about procrastination now. We're actually just going to put it off till next week. Online policies, you don't have to worry too much about the formatting. Anytime you get a new essay, I'll always spell out the formatting very clearly. MLA 12-point font, Times New Roman, don't mess with the margins. But when we get the first directions for the first essay, they'll be very detailed and you'll see exactly how to format the essay itself. For the major essays, they're all going to be submitted through Blackboard. So that means I want all the short assignments in email, any homeworks, any responses, reader responses, anything like that. Make sure those are going to the vote@ecc.edu website, email. Otherwise, those major essays, they're going to have a designated slot in Blackboard that helps clean up the organization, and it will help me be able to track down potential plagiarism for the actual major essays themselves. This entry, getting feedback, doesn't take up a lot of space, but I'd argue it's way more important, proportionate to how much space it takes up. I can say this as a true statement. The biggest difference between a typical C student and a typical A student is the A student will show me work ahead of time. So that means showing me ideas for papers, that means showing me bits and pieces in progress, and it definitely means showing me entire drafts. So you basically get to know what the grade is ahead of time, and you can make adjustments and tweaks to the paper before the actual due date. So always encourage people to email me ideas for papers, and I can tell you which ones might have better or worse prospects. Email me bits and pieces or an intro paragraph, or even email me a full paper. Always happy to workshop and make sure you have a sense of where your draft is, as opposed to just throwing it into the black box of Blackboard and wondering what kind of a grade it's going to get without any input from me ahead of time. So definitely recommend that. If you're shooting for the A, that should be one of the main ways you get your instructor check-in points. You're showing me drafts ahead of time, I'm giving you feedback, and you're making adjustments. Late assignments are bad, so you shouldn't hand in things late. You can read that on your own to see what happens to late papers. Essentially, it's a standard operating procedure. From the moment that the paper is late, it reduces half a grade, and then it progressively loses another half grade for every 24 hours. So here's really what I wanted to get to. I've just been stalling to get to what I'm excited about, which is a chance to talk about a new vocabulary term, one of the most essential vocab terms in the entire class, something we're going to talk about all the way through. And I wanted to actually use an old piece of syllabus to try to make my point. So we're going to come back to that. I'm going to tell you about the vocab term first, and we're going to revisit my old cell phones, pagers. Yes, I've been teaching long enough to have to deal with pagers in class, and iPods. So hold tight, let's talk vocab, and then we'll come back to this section. Okay, if you've been kind of tuning in and out, maybe you put this video on while you're cooking dinner, that's totally fair, but definitely make sure you write this down as essential class notes. This is your first official vocab term that I want in a notebook or on a flashcard. And let me make a distinction now. I'll introduce a vocab term, and I always try to give a simple definition first. I'm going to call that the flashcard definition. Basically, that means for the quiz, if you only knew this much about the vocab term, you would get the correct answer in a multiple choice context. So the term itself is text. That's your first official vocab term. And here's a case where you need to have the definition for how we're using it in this class. So if you just went online, you may or may not land on the correct definition that we get you there for the quiz. But for the quiz, if you just remember that a text is any man-made form of communication. And you could really stop there, and if you're just doing flashcards, you could probably get there. But I'd also want to add, anything that is a text can be analyzed. So if it's man-made and it is communication, you can analyze it and you can read for deeper meaning. That may sound abstract, that may not mean much to you, but I want to try to give you a few examples. And you could think of these as sample quiz questions, so you can kind of test to see how the definition works in context of real-world situations. So in thinking about the quiz, for instance, if there was a quiz question that asked whether or not something was or was not a text, you can keep it pretty simple and say, it only has to meet two requirements, and if it meets those two requirements, then it is a text. If it's man-made and it's a form of communication, if it's man-made and it communicates an idea, it's met the two criteria, so we would definitely call that a text. Let's go through some easy examples first, and then we'll try to stretch the definition and see what it might apply to that's less obvious. Of course, books. Anything from a phone book to a textbook to Shakespeare would qualify as a text. The traditional definition of text is the written word itself. So, of course, anything that involves a written word would qualify. Something like a text message from your girlfriend. Maybe it was an ambiguous text message. She asks what you want for dinner that night by text. You text back, oh, you can decide whatever you want, honey. And she texts back the word fine with no period and no emojis. That is a text that needs to be read for deeper meaning, because my guess is the actual content of that communication isn't that it's fine. Don't forget visual arts, though. I would go as far as to include movies, any form of entertainment like TV shows and anime. All of those would qualify as text. If you say, but they don't have the written word in them, they do meet the minimum criteria. They are man-made and they communicate ideas. Even things that are less narrative or less interesting, like tax forms, certainly would qualify as being man-made and communicating an idea, often pretty depressing ones. And of course, obviously, anything under the heading of media. So your fake news, your real news, anything that qualifies as social media. So you can see, just by those examples, we're swimming in text all the time. Text is everywhere, and we're constantly navigating different kinds of text every day. Still keeping that quiz in mind, let's imagine that at least one or two of the quiz questions were, here's the thing, is the thing a text or not? Let's look at some less obvious examples. Think about a painting. If that was the question, would you consider a painting a text or not? How might you answer? You could say it doesn't have any words written on it. In fact, unlike movies, it doesn't have any language whatsoever. It's just a still visual image, but doesn't meet the minimum requirements. Is it man-made? Sure is. That's the only way paintings get made. Is it a form of communication? It definitely is. It communicates an idea. So absolutely, for this class, a painting would 100% qualify as a text. Same thing with a piece of music. Music with lyrics, obviously, because you can analyze the text of the lyrics through language. But for this class, even a piece of classical music or some Australian didgeridoo music that has no language in it, it's man-made, it communicates an idea, so it also would qualify as music. Just to take you in a different direction, I could think of an argument where you came upon a dead body and said, is that dead body a text? And I might argue, no, it's a thing that used to be a person, but it's not really man-made, and it doesn't really communicate an idea, except, I hope I'm not dead soon. As soon as you say murder scene, you're trying to look for a story. You're trying to look for a narrative. And as soon as you say what killed the person, then you would absolutely say the murder itself was man-made, and it is up to the detective to read for deeper meaning. So one point I'd make there is the same skills that might make you good at reading a text like a book or a piece of literature involves a lot of the same skill sets as being a forensic psychologist or a criminologist or a crime scene investigator. You are looking at a text, you're trying to read between the lines and come to a deeper understanding of the text itself. What about a building, just a single physical structure like a building at North Campus that I hope we get to see again from the inside someday? Think to yourself, if that was on a quiz, would you consider that a text or not? There's no language, there's no words, there's nothing spoken, it's not even as artistic as a painting, but is it man-made? Definitely is man-made. Does it communicate an idea? It sure does, and if you want to go into architecture, architecture is the entire study of the meaning and the reading of physical structures. So something like a building would definitely qualify as a text. And finally, a slightly more tricky one. Say, well, the building communicates an idea. Here's a Gothic arch versus an old pyramid. Those are two very different ideas from two different structures. But what about a single brick? Could you say a single brick is man-made? Yes. Could you say it communicates an idea? How old is the brick? Where did you find the brick? Did you dig it up? Is it 10,000 years old? Is it 100,000 years old? Was it part of a little igloo out in the Yukon? Was it part of a South American hunter-gatherer tribe? The study of archaeology would be considered the reading of texts like bricks and old pottery and the vestiges of formal peoples. So I would go as far as to say even a brick. It's man-made, it can communicate an idea, so it also would qualify as a text. So you'll notice that we've created a pretty big umbrella term, right? Once you say a text is anything that's both man-made and it is also communicating an idea, that's a lot of things. That's most of what you encounter in a given day. And I'll be honest, you really kind of have to stretch your brain to think about something that is not a text. You may come up with something like a rock found in nature by itself. That single rock is not a text. It's not man-made. It may communicate an idea like beauty or smoothness, or it is sharp and rough, but since it's not man-made, that one wouldn't count. An atom of oxygen, you only encounter that in one way. You need it to live, but you really don't understand it beyond that. It's not man-made. It's really not communicating an idea. It's just keeping you alive. So I'd say something like that is not a text. And plants, trees, living things of all kinds. I picked plants as the last example, though, because if you find a plant in nature, it's not a text. As soon as you pick it and you bring it inside your house and you put it in a pot, now that plant is a text because you have arranged it. So something like gardening or horticulture, the act of moving plants around, then becomes a text. So walking into somebody's garden and noticing how they arranged it, where they put the vegetable patch, how they arranged the aesthetics, that would actually turn plants into a text. Once the man-made communication is brought to the item, then it is in fact a text. So text is very inclusive, and as long as it's man-made and it communicates an idea, then it's definitely a text. All right, I know that felt like kind of a digression, and it was, but essentially I'm combining two lessons right now. This would normally be spread over the first lesson, where we'd go over the syllabus, and essentially I'm talking through what I think is important in the syllabus, and the next lesson would look at text as one of the key vocab concepts, learning how to analyze texts of all kinds and be able to read between the lines and analyze that text more closely, whether it's a Shakespeare poem or a murder scene. But I wanted to come back to this particular example and just try it out on you. I told you that this is a text that I had to excise, so this isn't actually part of your syllabus. This is more like an artifact. This is more like an old brick from a period in ancient history that we can now analyze and read for subtle context. The first point that I would like to draw to your attention is the pager factor, the fact that this text says something. If you understand that pagers are such a bygone era, they should be next to the little typewriter on my desk. If you don't know what a pager is, look it up. It's adorable. There's a little brick on your belt. Somebody calls the brick, and you go to a payphone and call them back. So looking at this text and analyzing it as a text, that tells you something about how old this text is using context clues. You'll also notice if you read through it, I'm not going to, but you can read through it on your own, that it's pretty hostile. When I wrote this, I was angry at smartphones in class and the short attention span of students these days. I've actually softened on that, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more, not only about procrastination, but about our relationship to technology. And of course, specifically, I'm very curious about our relationship to smartphones and whether or not there might be a toxic or possibly even addictive relationship unfolding for many of us when it comes to how we interact with screens. So that's an example of trying to understand that everything is a text. You're trying to look at it in different ways, and that's one of the key aspects of the entire course. Okay, back to the actual syllabus itself. We're getting pretty far along there, hopefully not too much longer. In terms of makeup work, this is really specifically in reference to the essays. For every essay except the last essay, you basically get one redo. So let's say first essay goes well, you get like a solid B+ on it. Second essay, an A-, and then that third essay is like a C+. You just weren't feeling it, the assignment didn't go well, you put it off too long to the night before and wrote it in a coffee-fueled frenzy. Whatever the reason, you get a redo on one of the first 3 essays after the final due date. Don't forget, you can show me drafts ahead of time as many times as you want, and I'll keep tweaking and adjusting and letting you know where the grade is. But once you've had it in and the final deadline is passed, you can rewrite one paper for as high a grade as you want. Just make sure you stay in touch with me about the rewrite process so you know you're rewriting and renovating the right parts of the essay to maximize your own credit. Plagiarism is bad. You've heard that before. Not much else to say other than don't do it. It'll be even more difficult and more tempting to plagiarize because we're online. One of the reasons you're submitting the essays through the Dropbox is to hedge against that. I have powerful algorithms at my disposal that will be looking through the internet to see if there's anything similar or identical to the essay that you submitted, including other essays written. So try to avoid the temptation. I'd also make the point that honestly, by the time you do a good plagiarism job and you find something appropriate, you tweak the outsides, you get rid of the hypertext. Some of you leave the hypertext in, which is very foolish. It would take so long, you could probably BS your way through an essay and get a C-. So do that. It's less risky. If you're caught plagiarizing, very serious academic repercussions. You've heard it all before, but that's because it's true. So make sure you avoid plagiarism at all costs. You probably already have self-identified if you're a student with a disability or special needs. Make sure you're aware that there are resources for you, physical, psychological, emotional, whatever your specific situation might be. Just try to stay in touch with somebody who can help you out. Stay in touch with me, and we're going to be happy to make accommodations where possible. All right, this is a pretty vague topical outline, so think of this as the 4 main units of the course. I'm not going to go over them now. You can read through them and get a general sense. But what you need to know is those are 4 basic quarters of the course organized around the 4 main essays. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail about each essay. So you can read through that if it gives you some ideas ahead of time for possible topics. I always reward more points for originality in topics. So this isn't a creative writing class where you're writing stories or poetry, but creativity is necessary in coming up with an original topic. So figure if you can avoid the legalization of marijuana essay that you wrote in high school that still has grease stains because you had the munchies while you wrote it, that would be great. If you could avoid the Second Amendment gun control essay you wrote in high school in an angry frenzy. Doesn't mean those aren't good topics, but you want to make sure you have an original spin. You come at the topic in your own way. You're not going to have to worry too much about starfish. Essentially, I'll be using that to look up who's taking what courses and how they correspond with prerequisites. I'm not going to do much with it because I'm already getting over my seething hatred of Blackboard, partly because it's a platform monopoly with a garbage interface that I viscerally resent, and partly because I just can't learn 2 platforms from scratch. So that's one explanation as to why my particular Blackboard interface is as stripped down and as basic as it is, and you're not going to have to worry too much about starfish. The other important point to make there, though, is if you ever want an average, a grade average, you can always email me. So if you want to see how you're doing in the course, make sure you just send me an email. When I have enough data, I can tell you exactly where you're at and how you might need to adjust if you're going to try to boost the grade one direction or the other. Academic integrity just means avoid cheating and plagiarizing, and generally conduct yourself like an adult who lives in a society that we all do, a society for now. All right, I know that was long. I apologize for the longness and the dryness, but you'll at least know a little bit more about the syllabus itself. You've got 1 vocab term in the bag ready for the quiz. Make sure you email me with any questions as always, and we will see you around here next time. Take care.